She never imagined her life would change on the coldest night of the year. But sometimes survival looks like surrender, and rescue arrives when you've stopped believing it exists. Keisha Nwori pressed her back against the cold metal gate of Rosewater Estate, her entire body trembling beneath a torn cardigan that had long stopped keeping her warm. The security guard had chased her away 3 times already, threatening to call police if she didn't leave. But her legs wouldn't carry her anymore. Her vision blurred. The streets of Victoria Island stretched endlessly behind her, offering nowhere to go and no one who cared. Inside the small nylon bag clutched to her chest was everything she owned. A faded photograph of her mother's face, and a pocket Bible with her name scribbled inside in shaky childhood letters. 22 years old, and this was all she had to prove she existed. The wind cut through her like glass. Keisha closed her eyes, whispering a prayer she'd repeated 1,000 times without answer. Just before unconsciousness pulled her under, she heard the hum of an engine, the creak of the gate opening, and voices rising in alarm. She didn't have the strength to lift her head. Adrian stepped out of his silver SUV and froze. His driver had stopped abruptly, pointing toward the crumpled figure by the gate. Adrian's eyes locked onto the girl lying motionless on the cold pavement, her lips pale, her breath barely visible in the night air. Something violent stirred inside him. Not pity, but fury. Fury at the guard standing there helpless. Fury at a world that let this happen outside his own gate. "How long has she been here?" Adrian's voice was ice. The guard stammered. "Sir, she kept coming back. I told her to leave, but—" "You left her here to die?" Adrian's jaw tightened. He turned sharply to his driver. "Carry her inside, now." Minutes earlier, Keisha's day had unraveled in slow motion. She'd been washing dishes at a cramped buka in Aja, her hands raw from detergent and scalding water. The owner, Mama Chidi, had yelled at her for breaking a plate, docking her pay, and calling her useless. Keisha had swallowed the insult like she swallowed everything else, silently with her head down. She'd grown skilled at disappearing. At 7 years old, her mother had walked out without explanation, leaving Keisha at an orphanage in Surulere that barely had funding to feed the children. By 18, she'd been pushed out with nothing. No certificates, no contacts, no plan. The world had made it clear she was on her own. That afternoon, while scrubbing pots, Keisha had glanced at the small TV mounted near the ceiling. A news report showed Adrian cutting the ribbon at a new tech hub in Lekki. His face was sharp, confident, untouchable. Keisha had stared at him like he was a character from another planet, someone whose problems would never include hunger or homelessness. She'd thought bitterly that men like him never noticed people like her. But by evening, Mama Chidi fired her over a missing 20 naira note Keisha hadn't stolen. The tiny storage room where she'd been sleeping was immediately locked. Keisha stood outside the buka with her nylon bag, watching people pass by as if she were invisible. She'd walked for hours, her feet blistering, her stomach hollow. When she reached Rosewater Estate, she hadn't chosen it deliberately. She'd simply run out of strength. Now inside Adrian's mansion, Keisha opened her eyes to a ceiling so high it felt like sky. The bed beneath her was soft, impossibly soft. Panic shot through her. Where was she? She tried to sit up, but dizziness pushed her back down. A door opened, and Adrian walked in, his expression unreadable. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone trying not to frighten a wounded animal. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You were outside my gate. You were freezing, dehydrated, exhausted." Keisha stared at him, her throat too dry to speak. He poured water from a glass jug and handed it to her. She drank like someone drowning. "What's your name?" "Keisha," she whispered, "and Keisha." He repeated it carefully, as if memorizing it. "You'll stay here tonight. Eat. Rest. No one will throw you out." Tears slid down her face before she could stop them. Adrian said nothing, simply placed a tray of jollof rice and chicken beside her. She ate slowly, each bite tasting like mercy. He watched her from across the room, his mind spinning. Later that night, his head of security brought him a file, a background check run through facial recognition. Adrian scanned the document, his pulse quickening. Keisha Nwori, former ward of Gracefield Orphanage, Surulere. And Gracefield was one of the charities his foundation had personally funded 6 years ago. He sat back in his chair, staring at her photograph on the screen. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else. By morning, Keisha woke to sunlight streaming through silk curtains. The housekeeper, Mama Abani, brought her fresh clothes, simple but clean, soft against her skin. The older woman smiled warmly, treating Keisha like she mattered. It was a feeling Keisha had forgotten existed. But before she could process it, the front door burst open. A woman stormed inside, tall, elegant, and furious. Lily Kalu, Adrian's younger sister, pointed a manicured finger at Keisha. "Who is this girl, Adrian? What kind of stunt is she pulling?" Adrian's voice was calm but steel hard. "She's staying. That's final. You don't even know her." "I know enough." Lily's eyes narrowed, but Adrian didn't flinch. He stood between his sister and Keisha, his message clear. And Keisha, standing barefoot in borrowed clothes, realized something terrifying and wonderful at once. For the first time in her life, someone was choosing to protect her, but she didn't know what was coming next. Keisha thought safety meant staying quiet and invisible, but sometimes the past refuses to let you hide, and protection demands a price no one expects. Lily left the mansion in a storm of anger, slamming doors and muttering threats about family reputation. Keisha stood frozen in the hallway, her hands trembling. She wanted to apologize, to explain she hadn't asked for any of this, but Adrian raised a hand gently, stopping her. "Don't," he said. "You have nothing to be sorry for." But Keisha knew better. She'd learned long ago that kindness always came with consequences. People didn't help girls like her without expecting something in return, or without discovering she wasn't worth the trouble. She waited for Adrian to change his mind, to realize rescuing her had been a mistake. Instead, he asked her to sit with him in his study. The room smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Keisha perched on the edge of a chair, feeling like an intruder. "Tell me about yourself," Adrian said, his tone softer than she expected. Keisha's throat tightened. What was there to tell? That she'd spent 14 years in an orphanage where dinner was watery Gary and broken promises? That she'd worked 7 different jobs in 4 years, fired from each one for reasons that were never really her fault? That she'd slept in bus stops, church corridors, and storage rooms, always one complaint away from the street? "There's nothing to tell," she whispered. Adrian leaned forward. "Keisha, I know about Gracefield Orphanage." Her head snapped up. Fear flashed across her face. "I funded that orphanage," Adrian continued. 6 years ago. My foundation sent money, supplies, volunteers. I saw the reports. I know what kind of place it was." His jaw tightened. "I know they failed you." Keisha's vision blurred. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected him to know, to care, to connect the pieces of her shattered life. She wanted to speak, but the words tangled in her chest. Adrian didn't push. He simply waited, and somehow that made it worse, because patience was something no one had ever given her. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Mama Beanie made her breakfast, akara and pap, served on real plates. Keisha ate slowly, savoring every bite, still half convinced she'd wake up on the street and discover this had all been a cruel dream. Adrian left for meetings but told her she could stay as long as she needed. The house felt too big, too clean, too much like a place she didn't belong. But for the first time in years, Keisha allowed herself to hope. That hope shattered just after noon. Keisha was sitting in the guest room when she heard shouting outside. She moved to the window and saw 3 black SUVs parked aggressively at the gate. Men in dark clothing were arguing with the security guards, their voices loud and threatening. Her stomach dropped. She recognized one of them, a driver who worked for Chief Badmus. Panic seized her. Keisha stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. No, not here, not now. She'd run so far, hidden so carefully. How had they found her? Mama Abani rushed into the room, her face tight with worry. "Keisha, who are those men?" Keisha couldn't answer. Her hands shook violently. Downstairs, Adrian's head of security was on the phone, coordinating with the estate's private team. But the men outside weren't leaving. They were demanding entry, claiming they had legal authority to retrieve a missing person. Adrian arrived minutes later, his car screeching to a stop inside the gate. He stormed into the mansion, his expression darker than Keisha had ever seen. He found her huddled in the corner of the guest room, tears streaming down her face. "Keisha," his voice cut through her terror. "Who are they?" She couldn't look at him. Shame burned hotter than fear. "Keisha, I can't help you if you don't tell me." Her voice broke. "Chief Badmus, he took me in 3 months ago, said he'd give me a job, a place to stay. But he didn't. He kept me in his house like I was his property. I wasn't allowed to leave. He said I owed him, that he owned me." She choked on the words. "I ran away 2 weeks ago. I've been hiding ever since." Adrian's hands curled into fists. His entire body went rigid. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "He's not taking you anywhere." Downstairs, the confrontation escalated. Chief Badmus's men were threatening to break through the gate. They had paperwork, forged documents claiming Keisha was under Chief Badmus's legal guardianship, that she'd stolen from him, that she was mentally unstable and dangerous. It was a lie, all of it. But lies backed by money and power were harder to fight than truth. Adrian's lawyer arrived, but even he looked uncertain. "Adrian, this could get complicated. If they involve police, media, courts, it'll be messy." Adrian stared out the window at the men surrounding his gate. His mind raced through options, consequences, legal battles that could drag on for months while Keisha remained vulnerable. And then an idea struck him. Reckless, insane, but possibly the only solution that would work immediately. He turned to Keisha, his expression intense. "There's one way to protect you legally, right now, permanently." She looked at him, confused. "Marry me." The room went silent. Keisha's eyes widened in shock. Mama Abani gasped. The lawyer stammered something incoherent. "If you're my wife," Adrian continued, "Chief Badmus has no legal claim, no guardianship, no authority. You'd be protected under my name, my legal standing, my resources. He can't touch you." Keisha's mind spun. This couldn't be real. People didn't marry strangers to save them. People didn't risk everything for a homeless girl they'd found collapsed outside their gate. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know." Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "But I'm asking anyway. Will you trust me?" Outside, the men were cutting through the gate's security chain. Time was running out. Keisha thought about Chief Badmus's house, the locked doors, the way he'd looked at her like she was something he'd purchased. She thought about all the years she'd prayed for someone to see her, to choose her, to believe she was worth saving. She met Adrian's eyes and nodded. "Yes." Adrian grabbed his phone, calling his lawyer and the registrar simultaneously. "We're doing this now. I don't care what it takes." They escaped through the back exit, Mama Benny covering Keisha with a scarf and jacket. Adrian's driver took a route that zigzagged through back streets while the men at the front gate were still breaking through. At the registry, Adrian's lawyer had already pulled strings: money, favors, emergency protocols. The registrar looked confused but didn't ask questions when Adrian handed him an envelope thick with cash. As they signed the papers, Keisha's hand shook so badly Adrian had to steady it. Outside, they could hear sirens. Chief Badmus's men had followed, were closing in. The registrar stamped the final document just as the doors burst open. But it was too late. Keisha Nwori was now Keisha Kalu, and legally she belonged to no one but herself. Keisha thought marriage would be the end of her story. But sometimes the deepest truths hide in places we've already been, and the real miracle isn't being saved, but discovering you were never truly lost. Chief Badmus's men stood in the registry doorway, faces twisted with rage. But they were powerless. Adrian held up the marriage certificate, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "She's my wife, legally, permanently. You have no claim here." The lead officer with them hesitated, scanning the document. Chief Badmus had influence, but Adrian Kalu had something stronger: wealth that moved faster than corruption, lawyers who answered on the first ring, and a name that made even corrupt officials think twice. The men retreated, muttering threats, but they left. Keisha watched them go, her entire body shaking. She'd expected them to drag her back. Instead, she was standing in a government building with a marriage certificate bearing her new name. Adrian guided her back to the car, his hand steady on her shoulder. They didn't speak during the drive. Keisha stared at the ring Adrian had quickly purchased from a jewelry store near the registry, a simple gold band that felt impossibly heavy on her finger. She kept twisting it, checking if it was real, if this was actually happening. When they arrived back at the mansion, the broken gate was already being repaired. Security had been doubled. Mama Abeni rushed to embrace Keisha, tears streaming down her weathered face. "You're safe now, my child. You're safe." But Keisha didn't feel safe. She felt like a character in someone else's story, playing a role she didn't understand. That evening, Adrian found her sitting alone in the guest room. Her room, he'd corrected gently. She was staring at the marriage certificate, reading her new name over and over. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "You could lose everything because of me." Adrian sat across from her, his expression unreadable. "Keisha, do you know why I stopped that night? Why I didn't just tell my driver to keep going?" She shook her head. "Because I saw myself in you." Keisha looked up, confused. Adrian Kalu, billionaire tech mogul, seeing himself in a homeless orphan? It made no sense. "I grew up in Ajagunli," Adrian continued, his voice low. "My father died when I was 9. My mother sold pure water on the streets to feed us. I know what it's like to be invisible, to have people look through you like you don't exist." He paused. "When I made my first million, I promised myself I'd never ignore someone the way the world ignored me." Keisha's throat tightened. She'd assumed Adrian had always lived like this, in mansions, with drivers and security and choices. She hadn't considered he might understand. "But there's something else," Adrian said, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through files until he found what he was looking for, a photograph from 6 years ago. It showed him at Gracefield Orphanage, standing with a group of children during a foundation visit. The kids were thin, their clothes worn, but they were smiling. And there, in the back row, partially hidden behind another child, was a teenage girl with haunted eyes. Keisha. Her breath caught. She remembered that day, remembered the fancy people who'd come with cameras and promises, who'd left after an hour and never returned. She'd been 16, already knowing she'd age out of the system with nothing. She'd stood in the back because she'd learned that being seen meant being disappointed. I saw you that day," Adrian said softly. "I remember thinking you looked like you'd stopped hoping. And it bothered me. It bothered me for years." He met her eyes. "When my security team showed me your file 2 nights ago, I realized. You weren't random. You weren't a coincidence. You were the girl who haunted me every time I signed another check to another failing charity, wondering if any of it actually mattered." Keisha's hands trembled. She wanted to speak, but emotion choked her words. "This isn't charity, Keisha, and it's not pity." Adrian's voice was firm. "This is me finally doing what I should have done 6 years ago, seeing you, really seeing you." Tears spilled down Keisha's face. For 22 years, she'd believed she was a mistake, an afterthought, someone the world had forgotten to care about. But Adrian was telling her something different. He was telling her she'd mattered all along, even when she couldn't see it. The days that followed were surreal. Lily returned, still angry, but quieter, watching Keisha with suspicious eyes. Adrian's business partners whispered about the sudden marriage, creating rumors that ranged from scandal to strategy. But Adrian ignored them all. He enrolled Keisha in evening classes so she could finish her education. He introduced her to his foundation team, asking her to help shape programs for orphanages because she understood what the children needed in ways no consultant ever could. Slowly, carefully, Keisha began to believe this was real, that she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mama Abeni taught her how to navigate the big house, how to sit at formal dinners, how to speak up when people tried to dismiss her. Adrian was patient, never pushing, never demanding. Their marriage was legal, protective, but also something else, something neither of them had named yet. 3 months after the registry, Keisha was working late in the foundation office when she found an old file buried in archived documents. It was a report from Gracefield Orphanage, dated 7 years ago. She almost closed it, but something made her keep reading. And there, in the list of children awaiting adoption, was her name. Keisha Nwori, age 15. And beneath it, a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. Special consideration requested by AK, potential scholarship candidate. Follow-up required. Keisha's heart stopped. AK Adrian Kalu. She ran to find him, the file clutched in her shaking hands. He was in his study, reviewing contracts. When she burst in, he looked up in alarm. "You tried to help me," she whispered. 7 years ago. You tried." Adrian's expression shifted, surprise, then something like pain. He took the file from her hands, scanning it as if seeing it for the first time in years. "I did," he admitted quietly, "but the orphanage administration was corrupt. The money I sent for your scholarship disappeared. By the time I realized what happened, you'd already aged out. I tried to find you, but you'd vanished." His voice cracked slightly. "I thought I'd failed you." Keisha couldn't breathe. All these years she'd believed no one cared. But someone had tried. Someone had seen her name on a list and thought she deserved more. And that someone was standing in front of her now, having just married her to keep her safe. "You didn't fail me," Keisha said, tears streaming down her face. "You found me." Adrian pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since her mother left, Keisha felt like she'd come home. Not to a place, but to a person. To someone who'd been looking for her even when she didn't know she was lost. 6 months later, Keisha stood in front of 30 orphans at a new facility Adrian's foundation had built. She told them her story, the hunger, the rejection, the nights on the street, but she also told them about the night someone stopped, about the man who saw her when the world looked away, and she promised them what Adrian had promised her. "You are not forgotten, you are not invisible, and your story isn't over." As she spoke, Adrian watched from the back of the room, and Mama Abani dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Lily stood beside her brother, finally understanding. And Keisha, once homeless, once hopeless, once certain she'd been abandoned by everyone, realized that sometimes rescue doesn't look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like a billionaire who couldn't forget your face. Sometimes it looks like a marriage born from crisis that becomes something true. Sometimes it looks like a girl who was always meant to be found. Love doesn't always arrive the way we imagine. Sometimes it comes disguised as chaos, as emergency, as a decision made in desperation that becomes the truest choice we ever make. Keisha's story reminds us that being seen, truly seen, can change everything. That one person's refusal to look away can rewrite a life. That the connections we think are coincidence might actually be threads woven long before we notice them. If you've ever felt invisible, remember, someone is looking. Someone sees your worth even when you can't. And sometimes the person meant to find you has been searching longer than you know. Your story isn't finished. Your name matters. And rescue might be one moment of courage away. Like subscribe, share, and comment the lesson you learned.